The sun rose blood-red over the Malian Gulf, its light slanting across the marshes and the steaming vents the locals called Thermopylae, the hot gates. Beyond the brine and reeds, a road clung to the coast, pressed hard against the dark ribs of Mount Kallidromos. Here, Greek scouts watched the horizon with salt on their lips and worry in their guts. Across the Aegean, sails had multiplied like storm birds. Xerxes, great king of Persia, had bridged the Hellespont with ships and driven a road of planks over water. He had cut a canal through Athos to spare his fleet the capricious god of capes. Greece was a fistful of cities bickering over who owned which olive tree. Persia was a river that rose in the mountains and would not be stopped by reeds. Men whispered numbers. Herodotus would call them countless. Modern minds argue smaller, tighter counts, still enough to drink a river dry. Only the pass was narrow. Only the stones here did not move. A decision waited, and the first hoofbeats were already trembling in the dust. Who would hold the gate? In Corinth, in Athens, in Sparta, messengers ran with leather tags bouncing on their chests. The Hellenic League took shape not in grand halls but around maps scratched in soot. Politicians haggled, Argos declined, Thessaly wavered. Athens, under Themistocles, talked of ships rather than walls. Sparta listened with the stillness of a blade set on a whetstone. Their king, Leonidas, one of two kings, as the old dual throne demanded, measured the distance between pride and duty. At Sparta's hearth, the laws of Lycurgus left little room for speeches. A wall of men, an Ephraim muttered. A wall of shields, another corrected. The oracle at Delphi had wrapped destiny in smoke. A Spartan king must die, or Sparta would fall. Leonidas returned from Delphi with his jaw set, his eyes not harder but more honest. He called for 300 Spartiates, veterans with sons to carry the names, and for the free allies who would not let the Dorian spear stand alone. The date was marked, the road north awaited. Would the gods keep their silence? The march began before dawn, sandals wrapping dust, bronze chiming softly. Each Spartan bore the aspes, the round shield of wood faced with bronze, heavy as a promise. Over their shoulders hung red cloaks that caught the light like banked embers. Linothorax or bronze cuirass, greaves, a Corinthian helmet whose T-shaped eye slits narrowed the world to a corridor of threat. The Doru spear, 8 feet of ash tipped with iron or bronze, with a butt spike to finish work in close. Helots and Perioiku trailed with spare gear and rations. Allied contingents joined along the road, Thespians, eager and stubborn, Phocians and Opuntian Locrians who knew the mountain trails, Thebans sent under pressure, their loyalty in question. At every well and shrine, old women offered figs and silent prayers, and boys counted the plumes as they passed. Leonidas said little. He touched the heads of dogs that came to heel, asked for reports, cut the march when the sun bit. We hold until the fleet fights, he told the captain. Artemisium will matter if we do not break. Was the sea listening? Thermopylae was not merely a narrow road. It was geology conspiring with strategy. To the east, the Malian Gulf spread like beaten silver, its edge treacherous with shoals and tidal flats. To the west, the mountain rose steep and wooded, channeling the wind into a throat. Thence belched mineral stink. Hot water bubbled in rock basins where locals bathed aching limbs. The pass, at its tightest, allowed only a few shields abreast. An old Phocian wall, lapsed and crumbled, lay like a broken rib along the way, perfect to rebuild. When Leonidas arrived, he set men to clearing, lifting fresh stone onto old, straightening the line. Palisades were planted where marsh turned to mud. Scouts ranged to the Anapia path, the goat track that snaked over the ridge to the Greek rear. The Phocians swore to guard it, 1,000 men assigned to a promise, stakes hammered, lookout posts cut into scrub. The earth is our ally, a Locrian said, pushing a rock into place. Leonidas nodded. And our judge. How long would the earth favor them? In Sardis, in Susa, plans had been inked months before. Now, in the Persian camp settling like a city upon the Thessalian plain, the standards of many peoples fluttered, Medes with felt caps, Saka with tall pointed hats, Assyrians with helmets of iron scales, Egyptians with cowhide shields and straight swords, Phoenicians handling ropes and sailcloth. The royal guard, the immortals, 10,000 well-drilled men, moved with the quiet confidence that comes from good pay and constant practice. They carried wicker shields and short spears. Many wore scale corselets, some the fine Persian lamellar that rippled when they breathed. Archers with composite bows clustered in dark knots, their fingers stained with resin. Xerxes' throne traveled with him, and from it he watched the pale line of the hot gates. A wrinkle on his map turned obstinate in the flesh. Scouts returned with dust in their eyebrows. A wall rebuilt, they said. A king who smiles without teeth. He waited for fear to work its slow poison. Would delay be his ally? The Greek fleet gathered at Artemisium, the strait north of Euboea where currents ran spiteful and sudden squalls punished the unwary. Themistocles, sharp-eyed and always speaking 2 moves ahead, cajoled, bribed, and threatened his rowers into cohesion. If the pass falls, he told an Aeginetan who snorted at the Athenians, the sea falls next. If the sea falls, there is no Athens to argue over. Triremes creaked at their moorings, oars measured by chalk lines, bronze-sheathed rams polished until their reflections wavered. Signals were agreed, trumpet calls, smoke pots, torch codes for night. On board one Athenian ship, a boy ran his fingers over a carved owl and whispered, "Bring him back," though he could not have said who him was. Thermopylae and Artemisium would breathe in tandem. If one chest stopped, the other gasped. A storm smashed Persian ships on the Magnesian coast, breaking masts like ribs. The Greeks watched floating wreckage drift by and took hope, brief as foam. Would luck hold when iron met flesh? At the pass, the soldiers settled into a rhythm that felt like a drum echoing between cliffs. Dig, lift, stack. Sharpen stakes and wedge them in mud. Patrol to the hot springs where mist curled like ghosts and left salt crust on beards. The Spartans drilled in the afternoon heat, shields clapping, spears flashing in arcs that shaved hair from brows. "Stay close. The man to your right is the wall," a veteran barked. Thespian carpenters mended spear hafts. Locrians traded fish for wine. The Theban commander, Leonidas, kept his men aloof, his eyes flicking to the mountain path whenever the wind moved there. Leonidas inspected by night, the copper scales of stars sliding across his helmet. He slept on a cloak, not always long. When a skin of water spilled, he laughed. "Even the springs are nervous." A runner arrived breathless. The Persians camped within sight. Fires bloomed across the plain like a field of orange flowers. The hot gates breathed warmer. Would the first messenger of battle be an arrow or a herald? The herald came. He rode a dark horse with a crest that shone like obsidian, escorted by cavalry in glittering scale. He spoke in Greek polished by tutors. "Men of Hellas," he called, "lay down your arms and bow. Xerxes is merciful to those who know wisdom." The reply rose like one dry cough of humor, then straightened into words. Dionyx, a Spartan whose name would circle campfires for generations, stepped forward. "Come and take them," he said, simple as picking up a cup. The herald's face did not move, but something cooled behind his eyes. He recited another offer: relocation, titles, safety. Leonidas answered, voice steady. "Better to die in this pass than live where we would forget how." Negotiation, like water poured on a hot stone, hissed and vanished. That night, the Persians lit more fires, drums measured time. Greek sentries listened to the sound of many men breathing, a tide with lungs. A wolf barked on the ridge. Who would move first under the indifferent stars? The immortals met stone and found it less mortal than legend. Their wicker shields, light and flexible, were marvels in the open field, where archer and spearman melted and flowed. Here, the wicker gave under the weight of Greek spears, and without room to maneuver, short Persian blades bit harmlessly against bronze-rimmed spades. Still they pressed. Their captain called cadence. Arrows hissed overhead, hammers of air and fear. The Spartans fought with measured cruelty, thrust for the throat, the groin, the thin meat under the arm when a man reached to stab. The butt spike, the sore odor, finished the fallen who threatened the line. When spearheads snapped, Xipho's short swords flashed like cold tongues. By sunset, the immortals had failed to uproot the wall. Xerxes, sources claim, leapt from his seat thrice in anger. Night fell at last, merciful to no one. Fires spattered the pass. The dead were dragged by ankles. Who would count them without lying? Day 2 began with wind from the Gulf, fish stink and the clack of rigging from unseen ships. The Greeks ate barley cakes dipped in oil, figs, a little wine. They checked spearheads, stripped sweat-salted tunics, retied sandals. Leonidas walked the line and spoke in pieces. Hold. Rotate. Speak to your neighbor. No heroics. This place is hero enough. He sent for the Phocians guarding the Anapaea to report. They confirmed the path quiet, staked, watched. Keep your eyes, he told their captain. A path is a thought, someone will think it. The Persians began again with noise. Drums, flutes, shouted prayers to Ahura Mazda and to old mountains that had seen kings come and go. They came by waves, the bodies of yesterday now ground under sandals. Midday heat turned armor into baked clay. Sweat ran, grit stung. The Greeks adjusted the wall where stones had shifted, propped a section with spears. Not pretty, a Locrian muttered. It only has to be strong. A Spartan replied. Would the second day end as the first had, with defiance intact? At noon, a Persian officer tried a parley under flag. You see our number, he called. It is not wise to stand where the sea narrows you and the mountain bites your flank. Leonidas answered from behind the shield rim. It is wise to stand where your number matters least. The officer looked past him at the smoke of cooking fires, the steady drill, the simple order. He returned to his line with jaw tight. The immortals were hurled in once more, this time with heavier archery and the weight of men behind them, hoping to jam the phalanx until gaps opened like ripped cloth. Instead, the Greeks yielded a few steps deliberately, then advanced on a shout that shook the gulls from the water. A Persian standard fell. 2 men fought over it in the trample. An immortal reached a Spartan's face and slashed. The blade rang on bronze, scraping paint from the lambda, on the shield. Again, the immortal hissed. Again, echoed a Spartan, and drove the spear under the chin. Could repetition itself be a weapon? Far off, at Artemisium, triremes collided like rams on a hillside. Themistocles set ambush lines, used the strait like a slingshot. News came by fast boat, losses on both sides, but the Persian fleet had been shaken, its coordination stretched thin by weather and tight water. A messenger splashed ashore at Thermopylae, breath burning. They hold, he said, but we must buy them another day. Leonidas wiped grit from his lip. Then we buy. He ordered night watches doubled, men sleeping in armor. A Thespian sang a low home song and was shushed. He finished it anyway, softer. A Theban stared into the dark as if it would answer something he could not ask out loud. The spring steamed, and a fox trotted through the outer camp with a chicken in its teeth. The wind shifted, and the Persian camp smell came, spice, smoke, sweat, horses. The pass felt smaller than before, as if the mountains had taken a step inward. How much room did hope need to breathe? Dionysus, the Spartan who mocked threats like a man who kept them as pets, stood with younger soldiers and explained the economy of the phalanx. Do not lunge, he said. Let them break themselves on you. The shield is your brother, the spear is your tongue. Speak only when you mean it. He demonstrated the twist of hips that saved a shoulder, the way to angle the shield so arrows slid off. They say their arrows will blot out the sun. A youth grinned nervously, repeating a Persian boast heard in the dust. Then we will fight in the shade, Dionysus replied, and the lion laughed, not loud but with something like relief. When the next tide came, many arrows did fall, and for moments the light did dim. Shields lifted. The world became bronze and thud, breathing proof that preparation can turn fear into a task. Still, 2 Locrians died with shafts through their thighs, 1 Spartan through the eye, a Theban through the mouth. The stretcher-bearers moved like shadows. Was courage merely the habit of good drills? Xerxes adjusted tactics. Engineers were sent to flatten parts of the approach, to lay fascines and timber over the soft ground so more men could press in at once. Cavalry could not act in the choke, but horse archers hugged the margins, sending shafts that probed for gaps behind the hoplite line. Slingers with lead bullets found targets in faces and throats. In reply, the Greeks shortened the fight. The front files stepped up, struck, retreated by rank. Thespians lent out fresh spears. A Phocian with a hunter's ear pointed at the ridge. "Listen," he said. "Birds, then silence." Something touched them. Leonidas sent runners uphill with a password and countersign. They returned with the same report: nothing seen, everything felt. On the second night, rain licked the pass and turned fallen dust to clinging mud. Shields slid, sandals stuck, and men cursed softly. The hot spring steamed thicker. In the Persian camp, a man named Ephialtes, Malian by birth, lay awake with a hunger not for bread. Where would ambition find its price? Ephialtes came by day 3, or by night at day's edge, sources disagree, but the shape of his betrayal is hard stone. He went to the Persian lines and sought audience. He knew the Anapia path, he said the goat track the Phocians watched. He spoke of anger with his own city, of debt, of opportunity. He spoke of reward. The Persian general Hydarnes listened with the reserved face of a man counting risks, then weighed coin against time. He brought immortals and light troops to the foot of the path and began to climb under a canopy of trees that swallowed sound. The leaves were slick with the night's damp. The air smelled of resin and moss. Up top, the Phocian outposts felt the tremor first, stones dislodged, a whisper of leather on bark. A sentinel loosed a warning javelin, and the immortals fanned like ink through water. The Phocians panicked, falling back to a high ground spur, believing the camp below the true objective. It was not. The immortals flowed past. Down in the pass, a gull screamed. Had the hinge finally found its nail? Morning came thin and gray. A runner arrived from the ridge, lungs tearing. "They have turned us," he wheezed. "The path, Persians, immortals, coming to your back." Leonidas did not shout. He closed his eyes for one breath and opened them with decision already seated. He called his polemarchs. "Allies to withdraw," he said. "Spartans hold with Thespians. Thebans, if they wish, may go. If they stay with us." Some Thebans argued surrender, some hesitated, their commander inclined to live. The Thespian Demophilus stepped forward. "We remain," he said simply, a choice that would burn his city's name into bronze despite later fires that would erase it from maps. Leonidas sent the order down the road: break camp, gather wounded, march south. He did not watch them leave. "Breakfast well," he told his men, and they smiled because it was the sort of joke that did not lie. Could a few hundred buy a day for a fleet and a war for a people? The final day's opening assault was furious, but not blind. The Persians drove with mass to pin the Greeks in place, while Hydarnes' detachment pressed down the goat path toward their rear. Leonidas advanced beyond the wall, choosing to meet the tide on flatter ground, decision as weapon, refusing to be penned. They fought with shorter spears and naked heads, many helmets set aside so they could breathe and see in the crush. Leonidas was visible where men could find him, a point of balance. A Persian javelin struck him in the thigh. He broke it himself and planted his foot as if to bruise the earth back. A Spartiate fell. The man beside him stepped into the gap without looking, the line's grammar too old to doubt. Arrows came, and now they had no shade but the thick hoarse breathing of the shield wall. "Push!" someone called. "Push!" another answered. Dead men made low monuments underfoot. Was the measure of a king found in how long he could keep the shape of a line? They killed noblemen then. Herodotus names 2 brothers of Xerxes, and Greek morale flared in that knowledge like resin catching fire. The Persians surged, anger stoked. Leonidas fell at last. The sources argue details. A spear thrust, a missile, a swirl of blades, but the effect was clear. The Spartans rallied to his body as if it were a standard. They dragged it back by the ankles and planted themselves over it. The Persians, enraged, pressed to take the corpse as trophy. The Spartans countercharged to reclaim it when they lost it once. The fight turned circular, men killing in a ring around a body that was now both man and meaning. Thespian Demophilus died in the press. His men tightened, fury clean and unornamented. In the mountains, Hydarne's vanguard reached the rear of the pass where the Phocian outpost had been. Dust betrayed them to Greek sentries below. Trumpets sounded, the kind of note that pushes bile into the mouth. How do you hold a door when someone has opened the back of the house? When the killing stopped, there was no speech. There was only work, stripping armor, stacking corpses, counting captives, binding wounds that would not hold. Xerxes walked the field and looked at the wall that had refused him. He ordered Leonidas' head displayed, an act recorded in Greek sources with horror and in Persian memory perhaps with silence. He pressed on. The road south opened. At Artemisium, the Greek fleet withdrew in order to Salamis, knowing the pass was lost, knowing also that the time purchased was a coin now spent. The hot gates cooled, but their heat remained in the faces of men who had seen the ridge and would not forget it. The springs frothed on, indifferent. Gulls argued over a scrap of bread near a helmet half sunk in sand. A Theban captive stared at the sky and tried to count the moments until he would explain himself back home. What story would Greece tell over this grave, one of folly, or one of a price paid clean? News raced ahead of the Persian columns like a shadow at noon. In Athens, evacuation accelerated. Women and children were ferried to Salamis and Treason. The long walls echoed with wheel ruts and curses. Men carved names into wood as if scratching them would keep them fixed to the earth. Themistocles left messages for friend and foe, graffiti on rocks, letters pinned to doors, telling Ionians in the Persian fleet to remember their blood if chance allowed. In Sparta, the funeral songs began for men not yet burned. The Ephors countenanced tears in private, iron in public. The Phocians cursed their luck and their fear. Some climbed the Anapaea again to see where they had faltered and found only the same indifferent pines. Ephialtes, the traitor, melted into rumor and later, into a death at Greek hands that felt like a ledger settling. The mountain path remained, as all paths do, innocent of the feet that used it. Could a nation be betrayed by one man, or did betrayal need soil to grow? Xerxes entered central Greece with the pillared calm of inevitability. Cities opened their gates or emptied themselves and locked behind silence. The Persian army was a moving market, bakers, smiths, courtesans, camel drivers, threaded with spears. The smoke of temples rose, some by orders, some by accident, some by zeal. Athens was taken and burned, its Acropolis charred, though a small garrison had bitten with the fierceness of cornered cats. The great king sat on a high seat and looked across the water at the Greek fleet at Salamis. He had lost days at Thermopylae, ships at Artemisium, men in numbers that an orderly clerk could find frightening. He sought a decisive end. Mardonius pressed counsel for pursuit into the Peloponnese. Others urged a naval hammer blow. Themistocles set traps with messages and rumors, luring the Persian fleet into the strait. The wind freshened from the west, stirring banners. Did Thermopylae's echoes shape the choices of men now breathing salt instead of dust? At Salamis, the narrow water proved kin to the narrow pass. Persian numbers crowded themselves, Greek prows bit, decks ran slick. Xerxes watched from shore as ships locked and splintered. The sound was a forest breaking. By sunset the Persian fleet was a wreckage of valor undone by math and geography. Xerxes withdrew to Asia with part of his army, leaving Mardonius in command of a picked force to finish the war in the spring. Winter would chew the edges of all plans. In Plataea's fields below Cytheron, farms waited fallow for the seeds of 479. The bones at Thermopylae lay under cairns small and poor. A shepherd counted them with his eyes and then looked away, feeling that arithmetic gag in his throat. Snow powdered the ridges above the hot gates. Even the spring steamed less under the cold. Would memory fall asleep under frost, or did it stay warm as blood? Winter does what war cannot. It makes men slow down and listen to the creak of their own joints. In Spartan houses, mothers sat with straight backs and spoke their sons' names without trembling. He was where he promised to be, one said, and the women around her nodded, an agreement not of approval but of understanding. In Thespy, ruins smoked, burned earlier by their own hands to deny the Persians shelter. Survivors slept in caves and swore that whatever happened in the spring, their dead would not be alone. In Thebes, politics coiled. Some argued the wisdom of bowing to the river, others took the oath and held it like a hot coal they were not sure where to drop. In Persian winter quarters, the immortals polished their scale and said little about the goat path. Hydarnes kept his counsel. Ephialtes hid until he could not. A reward poster in Greek terms hung invisible in minds. Could the cold harden resolve the way it hardens ground? Spring rolled its shoulders, tense and lean. Mardonius moved through Attica and Boeotia with a well-fed army, offering alliances under a broad Persian tent. He courted Athens again, promising rebuilt walls and silver if they would accept Persian friendship. The Athenians refused, stinging like a scraped knee at a kindness that would shame them. They abandoned their city once more and headed to the island's embrace. Sparta delayed, debating festivals and omens. Pressure built like water behind a mill gate. Finally, under complaint from allies and a seething Themistocles, the Spartans moved. Pausanias, regent for the young king Pleistarchus, took command of a coalition that crossed the isthmus and marched north. The road to Plataea waited with dust and thorn. Thermopylae's lesson, stand where numbers shrink, was etched in their minds. Could open field be made narrow by wit? At Salamis, the narrow water proved kin to the narrow pass. Persian numbers crowded themselves, Greek prows bit, decks ran slick. Xerxes watched from shore as ships locked and splintered. The sound was a forest breaking. By sunset the Persian fleet was a wreckage of valor undone by math and geography. Xerxes withdrew to Asia with part of his army, leaving Mardonius in command of a picked force to finish the war in the spring. Winter would chew the edges of all plans. In Plataea's fields below Cytheron, farms waited fallow for the seeds of 479. The bones at Thermopylae lay under cairns small and poor. A shepherd counted them with his eyes and then looked away, feeling that arithmetic gag in his throat. Snow powdered the ridges above the hot gates. Even the spring steamed less under the cold. Would memory fall asleep under frost, or did it stay warm as blood? Winter does what war cannot. It makes men slow down and listen to the creak of their own joints. In Spartan houses, mothers sat with straight backs and spoke their sons' names without trembling. He was where he promised to be, one said, and the women around her nodded, an agreement not of approval but of understanding. In Thespy, ruins smoked, burned earlier by their own hands to deny the Persians shelter. Survivors slept in caves and swore that whatever happened in the spring, their dead would not be alone. In Thebes, politics coiled. Some argued the wisdom of bowing to the river, others took the oath and held it like a hot coal they were not sure where to drop. In Persian winter quarters, the immortals polished their scale and said little about the goat path. Hydarnes kept his counsel. Ephialtes hid until he could not. A reward poster in Greek terms hung invisible in minds. Could the cold harden resolve the way it hardens ground? Spring rolled its shoulders, tense and lean. Mardonius moved through Attica and Boeotia with a well-fed army, offering alliances under a broad Persian tent. He courted Athens again, promising rebuilt walls and silver if they would accept Persian friendship. The Athenians refused, stinging like a scraped knee at a kindness that would shame them. They abandoned their city once more and headed to the island's embrace. Sparta delayed, debating festivals and omens. Pressure built like water behind a mill gate. Finally, under complaint from allies and a seething Themistocles, the Spartans moved. Pausanias, regent for the young king Pleistarchus, took command of a coalition that crossed the isthmus and marched north. The road to Plataea waited with dust and thorn. Thermopylae's lesson, stand where numbers shrink, was etched in their minds. Could open field be made narrow by wit? Children splashed in the hot basins and asked why soldiers had fought over baths. A shepherd, older now, showed a boy where the hill stood. Here, he said, tapping ground. They did not bend. The boy nodded, trying to feel the weight of men under stones. Across seas and centuries, soldiers would quote those lines, Romans at their Rhine, medieval knights in mail, riflemen in mud. The words traveled better than bones. Was the moral courage or obedience, or were those twins in certain light? Persian memory held Thermopylae differently, another battle in a campaign, courage respected, victory acknowledged without savor. In Persepolis reliefs, the subject peoples still came in orderly procession, bringing gifts. The empire had lost a field, a fleet, a future in Greece perhaps, but its heartland beat on. Greek chroniclers told of Xerxes' rage and sorrow as theater and as warning. Persian scribes, where they touched the topic, kept dignity. Later thinkers would read too much, or too little, into this gap. The truth is boring and therefore trustworthy. Brave men stood, brave men died, kings made choices under the pressure of time and terrain. Geography wrote its sharp grammar on human skin. In the end, Xerxes remained a king. Leonidas became a stone. Which is the greater immortality? The Spartan code, that later ages admired, laconic speech, cheerful fatalism, contempt for luxury, was never neat in practice. Helots bent over fields to keep the red cloaks fed. Politics in Sparta could be as vicious as any market argument. Discipline was a garden constantly weeded. Yet Thermopylae carved a cameo that made the mess look like marble. With it or on it. Spartan mothers were said to command, meaning the shield, return carrying it or laid upon it. At the hot gates, men made that phrase visible. Thespians, often forgotten, earned a thread of honor that would be snipped when their city burned later in the century, and its memory dimmed. The Thebans bore a stain that time both denied and could not erase. Complexity sat beside the fire and was asked to be quiet while the simple story warmed hands. Can a symbol be true if its edges are blunt? Weapons from the past show up in museums, a spear but eaten with verdigris, a helmet with dent and crack, an arrowhead green as moss. Scholars argue over armor types. Bronze panoply versus layered linen, the weight of an aspis, around 7 to 8 kilograms, most agree the length of the doru, the curve of a Persian aconix blade. They reconstruct fighting stances, test how a wicker spara behaves under thrust, measure the fatigue of holding a shield for hours. The experiments are theater and instruction both. A man in a Corinthian helmet discovers how the world narrows. A reenactor in lamellar feels the way scale slides against hip. A rank of 6 tries the othismos and learns how breath becomes a currency. The hot gates live again in sweat that is theirs, not the dead's. Is this play an act of reverence, or appropriation, or again something blurred? Tacticians trace lines from Thermopylae to later fights. They note how terrain selects winners, the bottleneck principle, some might call it in lecture halls. Agincourt's mud, Rorke's drifts walls, Little Round Top's rocks, all cousins to the hot gates. But they also warn against worship of narrowness. At Thermopylae, the Greeks had discipline and drills. At other bottlenecks, men lacked those and died like seeds in a dry furrow. The phalanx demanded neighbors. It rewarded the man who kept his place over the one who lunged for glory. Persian combined arms, deadly on open ground, lost a limb in the choke but still bled men who stood. Lessons breed overconfidence if misread. The historian's voice in the documentary always slows here. A pass is not a plan, he says. It is an opportunity. How many planners have fallen in love with a map? Thermopylae's ethics tug most. Is it right to spend men on impossibilities? Leonidas surely knew he would not survive. Did he know he could not win? Yet their stand-bought days, stiffened spines, made salamis possible, Plataea necessary. It drew a line that said, there are things worse than death. The Persians were not demons. They enforced empire, sometimes brutally, sometimes with a light hand. They loved their children, burned incense, told jokes. The Greeks were not saints. They quarreled, enslaved, betrayed, innovated, dreamed freedom for some and not for others. In that ordinary mess, the men at the pass made a choice that still smells of iron and sweat when you say it out loud. Stay. Could anything simpler be so hard? By Roman times, Thermopylae was already a place to quote. Leonidas' name burned cool beside Horatius at the bridge. the Decii who devoted themselves, Cato tearing his pages. When the Goths came, when the Turks marched, when the Germans rolled, men looked at the same bottleneck and tried the old courage on like inherited armor. Sometimes it fit, often it pinched. The hot gates themselves shifted over centuries. The shoreline receded with silt, the pass widened, the springs bubbled on. Tourists arrived by bus, snapping pictures of a modern road where once a wooden wall stood. A plaque caught the sun. A guide with a hoarse voice told of the arrows darkening the sky, of a joke in the shade. Children asked if the Spartans had capes. A teacher closed his eyes for a second and said, "Red cloaks, yes." Was this delusion or propagation? On a cold morning not so long ago, a veteran of another war stood at the stele and read the words aloud. His breath smoked. He pressed his palm to the carved letters and felt nothing but stone, and that was enough. His war had not been noble, none are up close. Still, the idea of a line held, of a small thing done well because it must be, comforted him more than speeches. He turned and looked at the hillock, tried to imagine the last kneeling ranks, the hiss of arrows, the decision to stay crouched as the sky turned black. He lacked a word for what he felt, pride, grief, so he settled on respect. He dropped a coin at the base of the stone, not for luck but for company. Do the dead hear metal tick against their names? The documentary voice, if you close your eyes, comes back like a drum behind fog. Standards and estimates differ, it says. Herodotus tells one story, archaeology tells another. Modern numbers settle in a middle wary of extremes. Maps appear, arrows slide, sepia photos of artifacts tint the screen. Then the voice slows, as if recognizing that facts are bones and a story is flesh. Listen, it says, and the sound of sandals approaches, of shields biting rim to rim, of a spear haft cracking. Men mutter short sentences. Here. Now. Hold. There are no speeches because breath is expensive. The camera moves into the phalanx until you can see a man's eye between his helmet and shield, red vein and grit. He is 37 and afraid. He does not step back. The music swells, but not too much. The narrator almost whispers. This is how history is made, by an ordinary man doing his place in an extraordinary press. Is that sentiment or truth, or both? Return to the first morning, gulls, salt, steam, and sun on bronze. The past is smaller than imagination, and that is the point. A boy from Trachis sells figs to a Thespian, and is tipped a copper he will show his mother with pride. A Persian archer oils his bowstring and murmurs a prayer that his fingers not slip. Leonidas tightens a strap and thinks of a son not yet fully grown. Hydarnes checks boots. The goat track will punish the unwary. Themistocles argues with the captain about ramming angles and then smiles as if he enjoys the fight before the fight. In Susa, a woman opens a window for cool and wonders why the air smells of distance. In Delphi, smoke curls and says nothing. All of these are true, or close to true, and the smallness of them is what makes the larger machine turn. Do we honor them when we lift them into an epic? On the last afternoon at the pass, a Spartan with a cut across his cheek turned to the Thespian at his shoulder. Name? He asked. Antiphon. The man panted. You. Alcimus. They nodded, cancelled men who suddenly wanted to be recorded. Tell someone, Antiphon said, and Alcimus laughed once. You tell them, he replied. A spear glanced off Antiphon's shield and bruised his arm to bone. He grunted and stepped forward anyway. Later, on the hill, Antiphon would lean into Alcimus' shield to keep it level as arrows hammered it. Still there? Alcimus asked. Still, Antiphon answered. Such dialogue does not survive in books. It lives in imagined breath and the knowledge that men do ask for names at the lip of oblivion. Would you? In the Persian line, an immortal named Artaxerxes, let him stand for many, counted his steps into the pass. He had fought in Lydia and on the Industry. He had carried a standard and lost friends to disease and loose stones. He respected enemies who bled like he did. When the Spartans feigned retreat and turned, he found himself face to face with a bearded man whose eyes widened not with hatred but with effort. Artaxerxes drove his spear. It skidded off a shield boss. The Greek's spear flicked. It passed under Artaxerxes' ribs. He gasped, surprised less by pain than by how quick it happened. He fell and watched sky. A gull crossed his vision. He realized, absurdly, that he had never liked gulls. The sound of battle became shoreline noise. Someone stepped on his hand and kept going. He felt a calm like the end of a song. Who remembers him? Perhaps we do now, briefly. Archaeologists kept coming. They dug along the old shoreline, used cores to map where the sea had been in 480, argued about the exact line of the wall. They found bones on the Kolonos hill, burned in a way that suggested pyres and hurry. They matched arrowheads to Persian patterns, spearheads to Greek. They drew in notebooks with careful, almost loving lines. They taught students to separate romance from residue and then aloud, in private, that romance is what brings volunteers to the trench at dawn. They looked up from a pit one afternoon to see a school group reading the epitaph. The children read slowly, syllables like stones placed in a row. The archaeologist, mud on his boots, felt the old phrase cut new. Fieldwork can do that, make the past stand next to you in the thin shade of a tent and say nothing, which is somehow more convincing. What else do we need from the dead? In quiet rooms, military historians ran numbers. They estimated march rates, calorie needs, arrow volumes, spear fracture probabilities. They modeled the phalanx as a dynamic system, pressure, recovery, rotation, using equations that would have startled Herodotus and bored Leonidas. The math told them what the men already knew: discipline plus terrain bends outcomes. Fatigue is the thief knows sentry spots. Command decisions cascade faster than fear. They noted how Leonidas' choice to dismiss allies preserved the core of the force that would fight at Plataea, and how the Thespians' refusal inflated honor beyond their census. They wrote footnotes that corrected exaggerations without extinguishing the ember in the story. The best of them ended chapters with silence, a page that felt like a breath taken at a graveside. Can a graph teach courage? No. But it can strip away lies so the simple thing remains visible. Thermopylae's shadow falls in odd places. A firefighter holds a stairwell as others flee smoke. A nurse keeps a hand on a patient's chest through a long night, while machines cough and lie. A teacher takes a stand in a meeting where the easy decision would save her discomfort. None of these are war, but all of them are walls of men and women. The phrase, "Stand where your number matters least," lodges behind the teeth. Thermopylae did not invent courage. It named a shape for it, a geometry you can carry into rooms that smell of coffee and toner instead of blood and brine. When people say hot gates, now, they may think of films, of capes of gloss. Let them. Then, if they stay a minute longer, tell them about the springs, the gulls, the mud. Reality is the teacher that sticks. Do we need the stink to learn? Return to the traitor for a breath. Ephialtes died not at Spartan hands but later, killed for reasons that may have been private as much as public. The story flattens him into a mask, but in life he had a father, a house, habits. He knew the path because he had walked it without treason in his mind before the day he sold it. A culture clings to villains because they are convenient hooks. Treachery explains away complexity. The truth is duller. A man wanted reward and safety and chose himself. The cost was a bend in history that might have happened another way on another day. It is cold comfort, but it keeps us from magic thinking. Thermopylae was lost because men can be found by money or fear and because the mountains accept feet from any direction. Does that make the stand smaller? Or does it make it more human, and therefore larger? At dusk, the hot gates still sigh. Steam rises from the springs, iron-scented, and pine resin sweetens the air. Cars pass on the modern road in a hum like faraway bees. If you stand on the hill and close your eyes, you can hear sandals and breath if you need to. Or you can hear nothing at all and let the emptiness teach you the lesson cleaner. A wall of shields, the old man had said. You hold your shoulders a little tighter at that, feel the ghost weight of wood and bronze. You imagine the grip, the ache, the neighbor's elbow, the urge to scratch that you do not indulge because the lion will feel it. You open your eyes. The stone with the words is still there. The mountain does not move. The gulf glitters. How small they were, and how vast. The narrator's voice returns one last time, softer now, as if the studio lights have been turned down to spare a headache. In 480 BC, he says, a pass no wider than a city street held an empire at the edge of its map. A map appears, fades, a spearhead rotates slowly, a helmet sits on a velvet block. The camera drifts over the springs and the hill. There is no triumph here, only steadiness. We are invited not to cheer but to recognize. In that recognition is a promise that we will remember what men did with limited choices and limited breath, and that when our own narrow places come, we will choose rightly, or at least, we will not lie about what we chose. The music thins. A gull calls. The credits wait. What else is there to say? Their bodies were lost to time, but their defiance became immortal, a whisper carried through the centuries, teaching warriors and kings alike that courage, not victory, defines a man's worth. Thermopylae did not save Greece by itself. Salamis and Plataea did that. It did something quieter and, perhaps, more necessary. It taught a lesson that outlived all walls, that place and what can mate to birth a moment that refuses arithmetic. Spartans, Thespians, even Thebans in their not quite choosing, each added a thread. Persia, in its breadth, showed that empire could respect as well as crush, that the foe is a mirror with different light. The hot gates remain, not a shrine to death, but a school for resolve. Walk there, if you can. Stand in the steam. Listen to your own breathing. Ask yourself, without drama, when your past comes, narrow and hot, what will you hold, and who will you hold it for?